On Monday, Andy Burnham stood in what was the museum called?
It's the People's History Museum.
The People's History Museum, but you couldn't see that from the backdrop, actually, because
you could feel it in your heart.
He was just standing in front of a barn door, but I found that very moving in itself, obviously. So he scrambled the nation's journalists up from London Euston, only to not take any questions for them.
They're a bit sore about that.
They are a bit sore, and we'll be talking about what he needs to answer going forward later on. But he essentially unveiled his vision. It was a very vibes-based vision for Britain and its economy and his growth plan, and really what he plans to do when he has the keys to number 10, which we are expecting, assuming there are no challenges in the leadership contest, to happen on the 17th of July.
He's going to need 2 sets of keys, though, Cleo, because it's not just number 10 in London, it's going to be a number 10 in the north.
Yes, very excited to know what you make of that with your old Deputy Cabinet Secretary hat on, because I imagine that is going to be logistically challenging. Very nice, very exciting vision. But I think that's the crux of what we want to get to today is, he has a folksy charm. He has a great way of communicating. He does say what a lot of us are already thinking. And to be honest, many prime ministers have been articulating for quite some time. But will apple pie hit with reality and be crushed into crumbs?
We don't need to bring the pie into it, Blair. Come on.
The People's Pie Minister.
Pie. Let's listen to a little bit of what he had to say.
Now get this. Number 10 North will be the nerve centre of a rewired Britain.
I really hope that he starts every single announcement with, now get this.
Yeah,
now
I like
get this.
That's like, right, here you go. You're going to want to clip this, as we just did. and with it, now get this. But also...
Are you ready for it?
Now get this. Here's something that's really going to hit home. And then, for me anyway, a slight word salad. Number 10 North is going to rewire Britain. Okay. You're going to put that in Latin on a motto on the front door. I don't think that is, I'm going to solve your problems, Bill Clinton. I feel your pain. But to be discussed. It was a bumper day for speeches, though, because to try and pip Andy Burnham to the post, Kemi Badenoch had 5 key points that she wanted to challenge him on. Cut the cost of energy, cut welfare bill, cut regulation, cut tax, and champion business. Let's have a little listen to Kemi's speech.
Mr. Burnham is clearly desperate to be in charge, but Prime Minister is not a ceremonial position. He doesn't have a plan beyond telling mayors to go and sort it out. This is not good enough. There is a country to govern. Devolved mayors are not going to fund the Defence Investment Plan. He needs to come to Parliament, tell us what he wants to do, and face some questions from MPs, the people elected to hold the government to account. Giving speeches in Manchester and not taking any questions is simply not good enough.
That's a lot of flags that Kemi. Talk about backdrop. She's standing behind an awful lot of Union Jacks there.
4 Union Jacks. And then I noticed they've got a slogan on their lectern now, which is stronger economy, stronger Britain. Snappy.
I don't know what you thought about Kemi's speech yesterday. I think it's an odd kind of power dynamics move. If you're the leader of the opposition, and you are actually the leader of the opposition, should you really be dignifying somebody who's not even at the moment in the contest to be the leader of the Labour Party by trying to go out and preempt their speech? It was an odd choice, I think.
Yeah, I think it's called being too clever by half. Very cute.
Technical term.
Yes, it's very cute to get out there. And what she ended up doing really was delaying Andy Burnham's speech by about half an hour, whilst she did a 15-minute speech and then took half an hour of questions, where she flew quite close to the wind on a couple of things. She implied that we'd already had a mayor as Prime Minister, and look how that worked out, ...
I found that a really bewildering. I couldn't exactly see that we already tried having a mayor to be Prime Minister, and that didn't go very well for us. It's like, hang on a second, wasn't that was you guys?
yeah. I thought that was well, unfortunately, that is speaking off the cuff, and that's what she came up with. I don't know whether she knows something we don't know. It is possible, just a little side note here, that she's looked at the makeup of the 2024 Tory vote, or indeed members of the Conservative Party now, and maybe there is not the Boris Johnson boosterism that there used to be. Maybe we're much closer to the kind of classic Cameroon member now.
Right.
And
so she thinks the red wall vote is basically gone.
Well, they barely fought Makerfield, did they? They put all their effort into Aberdeen South. And so there's an argument for, we just know all those people. We know the kind of Boris Johnson fans have left for reform. So,
Or Labour.
Or Labour. And we should be trying to pick off kind of classic home counties, Conservatives and Lib Dems, which is quite interesting because that is essentially the opposite of what Andy Burnham seems to be suggesting. He's really trying to kind of suck away from the South and consolidate his kingdom in the North.
Just before we get into it, the appropriation of the North to mean just Manchester, as someone from Yorkshire, I find troubling. I find it slightly painful. It's the wrong side of the Pennines.
Yes, I definitely think that. Do you remember how everybody got tired of Keir Starmer talking about how his father was a toolmaker?
I do remember that.
Maybe this could just be me speaking, but I wonder whether Andy Burnham might want to change the tune on Manchesterism quite soon.
I don't think you're going to be in luck there.
Does he speak for everyone? And as our northern correspondent, is there a rivalry in the North where people will think, oh, well, it's great that Manchester are getting the number 10 of the North, but what about us?
Did you just ask me, is there a rivalry in the North? Yes, Cleo. People from Yorkshire and people from Lancashire have been at odds for quite some time.
But is there genuinely a danger in him kind of bigging up Manchester so much and seeming to put a lot of power and investment into Manchester here? And is he in danger of neglecting, say, the North East?
I think it's a really interesting question. It's definitely going to be a challenge for him. So what we've seen him do totally predictably, and, fair enough, is he's anchored hugely heavily in Manchester. He's anchored hugely heavily in Makerfield. We heard in the speech yesterday him yet again talking about the Makerfield test. So if it doesn't work in Makerfield, he doesn't want to do it. That is not, Manchester and Makerfield doth not make the world. And I think there is a risk that both people genuinely feel alienated because there's an awful lot of the country that's not a big city. There's an awful lot of country that's not in that geography. There's an awful lot of people who are going to vote for him or not, who will need to understand he is actually going to be the Prime Minister for the United Kingdom. And that's not just the north of England, not just England, but Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. It is a different sort of mindset. And I think we probably will see some adjustment over time because it will definitely start to grate on people. Yeah,
I mean, do you think he's in danger of becoming the least powerful Prime Minister in British history by ceding so much control?
Well, so I think let's talk about this, which is devolution. What he effectively stood up and said in that audience yesterday is that he deliberately wants to be the least powerful Prime Minister. So after the 10-year reign of Burnham, then what he will definitely have done is made the job of the Prime Minister much less powerful because real decision making will have been devolved to, and he listed off pretty much every single aspect of government outside of Whitehall. So whether that's to the devolved administrations, they will be, ears would have pricked up in hearing some of this yesterday. He talked about regional government, he talked about mayors, he talked about local government, genuinely a massive, from the sounds of it, shift in balance of power.
Obviously, he's got his own views on devolution. He's been a metro mayor and he had, in the front row was made up of mayors. He'd managed to get them all there, and people are feverishly reading a book he wrote with Steve Rotherham.
I've read that book. I read the original book at the time, actually, Cleo.
Before it was cool.
Before it was cool, yeah, the first album.
One of the few unsigned copies. And he talks about post-Second World War Germany and how the power is not consolidated all in Berlin or Frankfurt or wherever. And I think that's very interesting. One of the big questions I have for Burnham, I suppose, is he absolutely certain there is so much public support behind devolution? And I would point to a couple of things here. My old mucker, Dominic Cummings, his first referendum he ever won was the no to the North East Assembly campaign in 2006. But there was a big argument for, we don't want to split into different parliaments and so on. And then since then, we have had 55, in the last 25 years, we have had 55 referendums on elected mayors. 38 of those have not been successful. Is there this big appetite? There has always been a big feeling of regret that there is a Senedd in some parts of the country. Wales is quite split on the question, actually. So I'm curious to know whether he's that confident that this amount of devolution is that popular amongst the public. And I would also just quietly say, having dealt with some mayors and some council leaders, and indeed the devolved administrations, I've often despaired at the kind of calibre of politician and administrator in Westminster and Whitehall. I don't think that these are better run organisations either. So giving them more power and more money, I'm not sure is the answer to being better governed and getting better services in these areas.
Well, let's take these one at a time. So I don't think he's doing it because he thinks it's popular. So I don't think that the motivation to stand up and say, I'm going to do all of this devolution is because he thinks this is an absolute surefire vote winner. You know, what do people love? Constitutional messing about. When do we want it? At some point in the future. No one really actually viscerally cares. See your point about who can be bothered to vote for an elected mayor? Like, why would I? I think he's doing it because he thinks that the quality of governing will be better. So it's not about the kind of means, it's about the end.
But to my point, is the quality of governing better, you know, when it actually boils down to the individuals involved and so forth?
It's going to be different. I think there are some absolutely excellent people, actually, in my experience. It's a slightly classic, SW1 snobbery of thinking that actually, you know, the problem is no one's quite as good as we are. In my experience, most of the real governing that people care about, which is like your bins being collected, that sort of thing, stuff that really actually matters to your day-to-day life, is done by local government. There are some absolutely excellent people who work in local authorities, as both on the official and on the political side. There will have to be more of them. The thing that really worries me, actually, about kind of this idea of devolution is that one of the things that, broadly speaking, keeps national government on the straight and narrow is the amount of scrutiny of national government. So, absolutely, if you're a cabinet minister, you can expect what you say in any context to be entirely crawled all over, and there's people whose professional life is trying to sort of make you look stupid. Thank you very much, our nation's journalists. Like, it's an important thing. One of the reasons, for our structural decline is the demolition of local journalism and local newspapers. So it used to be the case that local politicians and local people were all held to account by those newspapers in a local area, and some people who'd be really reporting on council meetings would be holding local politicians feet to the fire on what they were doing. And the fact that that has all but disappeared from our kind of consciousness and our democracy is really problematic. The second thing I'd say is that the place that you have to balance real conflicting interests, like shall we close that road, shall we open this school, do we need another health centre, is this the right place to put this new factory, is at a local level. So there is a really strong argument that you would make better joined up decision making in places than you do in Whitehall, where you don't have to manage those competing tensions. So I think there is a believable case that our governing would be better, that you get more sensible decisions in places that made sense for the places themselves if you had more power. And if you look across our kind of long economic history, it just has been true that places have been more prosperous if they've been able to make decisions themselves. And the massive sucking of concentration of power and money to the southeast of England, and to London in particular, has coincided with all of the actual power coming to London and the southeast of England. So it's not an unreasonable case to make.
Listeners might remember that parts of the Treasury had already been moving to Darlington a few years ago. That was actually under Rishi Sunak. The Conservatives, you know, have also been trotting out this language for quite a long time. George Osborne was talking about the Northern Powerhouse. Boris Johnson was talking about levelling up. Rishi moved the Treasury to Darlington. But, you know, with your old both housing and cabinet office hats on.
Wearing a lot of hats.
Lovely hats. Stack them up. How does this actually work in practice? You know, we are already halfway through an election cycle, actually. So we've got an election in 2.5, 3 years' time. What will be happening in Whitehall? Are they going to be thinking, how do we get this done? Can it be done? Are there even any existing plans that could be dusted off to try and get this number 10 of the North going ASAP?
Well, I mean, yes, okay, people have talked about this before. I don't think anyone has believed it in quite the way that Andy Burnham really, really believes it. So it's in his bones, basically. And that's partly because he spent 9 years as the Mayor of Manchester having these arguments, but also because he's seen in practice how it works, and he's been frustrated from where he sits he knows that he would have been able to take better decisions and do more, and the more power he's had, the better it's been for Manchester. He can see it in practice. So I can't think of the last time we've had a Prime Minister who genuinely, like, viscerally feels these things. So I think that's going to be different. The real kind of rubber hits the road stuff is the devolution of money. So it's about, are you prepared to give actual real life money and actual real life choices to these people? And are you happy that they're going to do things that you don't like? Because you and I have both been in situations where, like, this stuff is great in theory, and then in practice you get this unbelievable kind of pushback, particularly on the political side, where if you've made, you know, the Conservatives had this with Andy Burnham in Manchester, and, you know, Labour had this with Boris Johnson a bit, that you have kind of, hang on a second, you're making the other guy look successful. Like, why are we doing this again? Why are we doing this again? So there are some real political downsides to giving away power. I mean, even to your own side sometimes, because they're not ever grateful. No one says thank you, and that's enough. Like, they always say, it's not enough. Despite this rotten government, I've been able to do these things, but I could do so much more if you gave me more power. So this will become a reality, and this is, I think, where all the speculation comes about who is going to be Andy Burnham's Chancellor. It's always an interesting question, but it's a really, really particularly pertinent one now, because you have to believe, for what Andy Burnham said to be true yesterday about real devolution, you have to believe there's a Chancellor who also is going to do that, and they're going to devolve two massive things. One, actual decisions about spending. So let people in a place decide whether to back this bit of railway or that road or this bit of infrastructure. And then, even more frightening for my former Treasury colleagues, fiscal devolution, our old friend. And that's not about spending, that's about raising money.
What I want to ask you about next then, and this I think really is in your good old wheelhouse, the idea of these Whitehall turf wars. So Andy Burnham lamented at length at how he's had to fight the civil service and Whitehall for money and power, and he's been part of these scraps for years. And the big problem is these departments just fight with each other, and if they could all just agree,
if they could just get on, why isn't anyone friends?
And like, if Andy can stand in the centre of a peace circle where they're all holding hands, things will just be better. Helen, people have talked about this for such a long time, but you've actually been in the middle of all that. Can you just explain a little bit about, are these arguments just people briefing to the papers and it's not real? Is it really the Treasury that are always the baddies? Where does this all come about? And is it a fair characterisation from Andy Burnham to say that it's always just turf wars and fighting, and that is the big blocker to getting anything done?
So I liked this bit of the speech. I thought it was really...
Do you lie back in your tepid bath and think, oh, yes, I love
do
this.
actually like this time of year. I love a tepid bath.
Yeah, it's the only
also
way to get through heat wave. Yeah. Top tip.
Yeah. He talked about this being the problem, that Whitehall just couldn't agree with itself. And, you know, he's got something of a point, that it is annoying, actually, when you can't get government to join up. And you and I both sat there in the middle of the centre of government tearing your hair out because you literally cannot get the people in the Department for Transport to agree with the people in the Department for Energy, or to agree with the people. It's difficult, right? But that's for a reason. It's because these are genuinely, lots of the infighting in Whitehall isn't kind of people just having a scrap because they want to, or politicians trying to get one over on each other. It's because there are actual structural choices to make. So if you say... infrastructure investment is a really good one. You have a finite amount of money to spend on capital. So that is like actual stuff that you and I can see, you know, trains, railways, A-roads, nuclear power plants, you know, whatever it is, like capital investment, housing development. You've got to make some choices about which of those, where to put that money. Of course, the people who work in the Department for Transport are going to say to you, well, actually, the thing you should do is pay for transport. And of course, the people who work in the Department for Housing are going to say, no, the transport can come second. We need to build the houses first. And of course, the people who work in the Department for Energy are going to say, well, no, the investment needs to go first into the grid, because unless you have that. So these are, Whitehall tensions are quite often real tensions, because you are making a choice. And I think one of the things that, you know, we've talked a bit before about this on the pod, that one of the things that hits new prime ministers pretty hard is that to govern is to choose. That effectively what you have to do all day, easy decisions are taken elsewhere. The hard decisions, which is, right, are we backing this or that? Are we investing our money in HS2 or not in HS2?
Yeah.
Are we going to allow this business to go to the wall? Are we going to allow... These are all hard choices about scarcity of resource and time and effort, whether that is money or legislative time or whatever. And you as the Prime Minister have to make a choice. And the Whitehall tensions are quite often articulated through that. It's not just a department versus department. It's, what should I do?
Have you picked up from any of your former civil service colleagues who are still in how they have reacted to the speech? Because you say it warmed your heart, this section. Was there a certain amount of cynical eye rolling, thinking, well, there's infighting for a reason? Or are people thinking, do you know what? Maybe he could actually unblock some of this stuff. This would be fantastic if someone is coming in willing to make some choices. We understand what our marching orders are and we just go and do it.
So I think it's fair to say they are very keen to have some marching orders because that's one of the things that they feel they've not really had under this government enough. I think that there's been a lot of talk in Whitehall for a long time about place-based decision-making. So actually you should make decisions about a place in a place. Some of this stuff... And I remember the first time I heard someone talk about place-based decision-making, I was like, what's the alternative to that? Aren't all decisions made in a place? This is very confusing. So there's been lots and lots and lots of kind of efforts and initiatives, and my poor old former department, the Ministry for Housing and Local Government, has for years and years and years tried to get the rest of Whitehall to see that it's sort of, even if it doesn't let places make their own decision making, they should at least have a little bit of a thought about the fact that all of these things that they are independently doing are having the same impacts on a place. And you're asking one poor council to suddenly on one day of the week do one thing and then another, like that. There is a frustration there.
Yes,
I think that if Andy Burnham is able to properly deliver on this through his ministerial team, then it will be really different. Because the other thing that happens is you get all of this high rhetoric, and then either the Chancellor themselves or the people who are running departments will say, oh yeah, but that doesn't really apply to us. Because politicians like to be powerful. And this is all about taking power that you hold and giving real power, real decision making, definitely the credit, not often all the blame, to another set of politicians somewhere far away that you're not in charge of.
Yes, well, speaking of place-based decision-making, just practically, again, from running Whitehall, how is it going to work with the Prime Minister taking half his decisions or having half of his nerve centre in the north of England? Do you think there is something quite healthy? It's almost like an away day thing of like having some distance and not having, the top brass and the MOD being able to march across the road and boss you around, for example. They'll have to get a 2.5 hour train that might be delayed to come and have a bit of decompression time. There have been plans in the past to move bits of government around the country. Do you think that practically this is going to work?
I really like the idea of number 10 in the north. I said it.
You can see all the civil servants just like Googling flats on Rightmove right now.
Yeah, that's what we did when we wanted to move the House of Lords to York, which is still an excellent idea. I stand by that. But I think number 10 North is a really good idea. One of the issues with our governing is that SW1, which is the postcode where Whitehall is like a terrible place to make decisions that affect the whole of the country. London is atypical, abnormal. The kind of people who can afford to live and work within commutable distance to SW1 are not representative of the country. Now, we saw that kind of quite strong, actually, in the, we were talking about this last week, in the Brexit referendum. SW1 isn't representative. The civil service is not representative of everybody. Now, does it have to be? Different question. Would it be a good thing if a large amount of the Prime Minister's personal kind of advice and thinking had in it the DNA of people outside of SW1? 100%. So one of the problems you and I had in COVID times was the massive disconnect from most people's ordinary lives and the people who are in the room making the decisions. So I think, and in this day and age, it is just nonsense to suggest that you actually physically need to be in one place in order to get anything done. Having said that, power goes with the guy. You should be able to literally sense that the Prime Minister is in the building in number 10. I always thought
Totally
you
agree.
always
Yeah.
could. You could.
Yeah.
It just
The Fridays when they were in their constituency or at a summit or something.
Oh, when they want to summit, I used to love that. It's blessed relief. They're
Yeah.
actually out of the country. They can do some other
Yeah,
stuff.
and it's sort of like, they're back.
They're back. I mean, you can feel it in the building. So Prime Ministers carry their power with them. So the real question is, like, could Andy Burnham have his policy team based in Manchester? Of course he could. Is Andy Burnham going to base himself in Manchester? That's a different question, because that's when you really have decision making somewhere different. And go back to what you said at the beginning of the episode, there are more places available in the country than just Manchester. So she says slightly bitterly still. so you have to think about, would it be a good idea to have other units, not just in Manchester, but in other parts of the country? You talked about the Treasury in Darlington. That's been a massive success. One of the things that's been a success about it is because different people who wouldn't normally have got jobs in the civil service or thought about it have started working in the offices in Darlington. And that's great. It's been a really, really good way of kind of freshening things up and having a different set of talent and perspective of people who don't, not everybody wants to live in London. Not everyone wants to work in London. People might not have thought about a career in national government. And actually, if you can have a career in national government outside of London, tremendous. I think it's a good thing.
I think that's fair. I think my only counter to that, because you know how I hate to disagree with you,
You do hate to disagree with me.
I think COVID's probably my best example of this, that you can have these Zoom calls and they can be very productive and you can have the formal meeting, but so much goes on in person around the meetings, the little chats when you're getting your cup of coffee before or after, and lots of relationships are made that way. Some of it is a lot of what people find distasteful, gossip and so on, but you pick up all kinds of stuff in the margins. And once the Zoom call is over, you don't know. And you don't know what the other people are saying in the room once you've gone off. And I think it is difficult. You can get a lot of business done, but I think sometimes some of those atmospherics, particularly because you want to see how the Prime Minister is reacting and the other key stakeholders, you can't really tell that so much.
So I actually don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you. We keep being told to disagree more. So unfortunately, this isn't it.
Yeah.
Because
this is place-based decision making in this place.
This place. Just make all the decisions. I agree with you. So it's not going to work if it is the Prime Minister has a number 10 in the north, and actually it's just a group of people on a Zoom call with a load of people in SW1. That's not what this should be. Yeah. If it's meaningful, it does need to be that the actual real-life Prime Minister and the actual real-life Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and all the people who think they're too important to leave the postcode actually do, and they base themselves for a part of the week or part of the time. It's quite complicated, is the thing I would say. So as soon as you talk about an office called number 10 and a place where the Prime Minister and his most senior advisors need to be, you have a proper security question.
Yes.
So, this is not, and I know that there's conversations going on about where this might be. There is quite a lot of sensitivity around if you're going to really have a nerve centre for our country's government in another place, then that needs a bit of careful thought.
Just one last bit of the speech I want to talk about before we talk about what he didn't say and how the other parties are kind of coping with this. He very carefully did not say the words cost of living, which I thought was interesting, but he did talk about wanting to boost living standards over the next 10 years. Wouldn't you just love a election cycle to be 10 years, just from when you were a civil servant, to have all that time to play with? But Andy Burnham doesn't have that much time. Obviously, he's pitching for the next election too. But, I heard Boris Johnson talking about a boost in living standards for the next 10 years. Again, is this just a bit of pie in the sky thinking, or is it absolutely necessary to have to look to 10 years' time and say, I need this much time to do what I'm talking about?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I literally remember us being in Chequers in January 2020, talking very explicitly about 10 years of Boris Johnson. I think we even called it Johnsonism at the time, heaven forfend. But we did talk about and start to actually properly plot and plan out what would be in the first term, what would be in the second term, how you could bring some stuff forward to get you that magic second term. And Keir Starmer, when he came into power, I think people thought similarly, he had an extremely long, with this side of the majority, extremely long road ahead of him. I don't know enough whether there were proper plans about actually what does 10 years look like. It's an amazing amount of open road if you get the opportunity to have that in front of you, because you really can do the kind of stuff that you feel like you don't get chance to. That said, I mean, you only get 10 years from today if you win the next election and the next election after that. Mm-hmm. And some of the changes, so just take fiscal devolution, it will take a long time for people to see and feel the real impacts of some of this stuff. It's definitely not going to happen before the next election. You can talk about it excitedly. You might be able to do a couple of like slightly interesting things, but these sorts of really significant changes take a very long time. So I'm sure he's a clever man, and he is, for all the kind of narrative around him, he's a professional politician. But I think that he will know that he's got to do some things before year 9, put it that way.
And fast. I think that's absolutely right. In order to get 10 years, you have to do the first 2 years at breakneck speed, essentially. And I remember that conversation really well. Our plan was, obviously this is without COVID, win the 2019 general election. And then in order to win the election after that, we had to do a few things very, very quickly, not least things that people feel and notice right away. So break ground on 40 hospitals, new houses right by railway stations using these brownfield sites, stuff like that. So people see that, even if they're not feeling the immediate benefit yet, they do see the cranes and the diggers and they think, oh yeah, stuff's going on around here. I like that. And you can point to it and say, I've started, but I need you to give me your votes for 5 more years in order to get that done. And so he's got to get going very, very quickly. I am quite interested to talk about, obviously this is our response to the Burnham speech, but I think it is worth spending a little bit of time on what the politics of all this means, how everybody else has responded. So Kemi, of course, came straight out the gates ahead of his speech to, I suppose, try and frame what he's about to say, having seen quite a lot of it briefed into the weekend papers already. Farage came out immediately afterwards and essentially says this is more of the same. It's sort of Keir Starmer in a cool T-shirt. And then he called him Open Borders Andy, which was interesting. We'll talk about Burnham's wisdom in not mentioning...
It's not a very good nickname.
No. There's a slight alliterative thing to it, but bearing in mind he didn't mention immigration, I just thought interesting. Richard Tice, also from Reform, said that he's extreme far left and it's extreme socialism. And what just really occurred to me off the back of the speech is, particularly the right, don't quite know how to attack Burnham at the moment. Do they attack him as this is a very frightening and dangerous agenda and you should all be worried and there are going to be exit taxes and stuff like that? Or is this more of the same? And because he's able to frame himself as a bit of an outsider, because he's seems to be resisting the trappings of the centre by saying I'm going to have this number 10 in the north, and yet he is going to be establishment. He is going to ultimately be the biggest insider. Whether he can keep up being able to play both things at once will be very interesting.
I love that, though. I love how he's messing with everyone's heads. And it's not easy to pigeonhole as left or right, and not easy to pigeonhole as insider or outsider. And is he in a T-shirt or is he in a tie? And is he this or is he that? It's fun when politicians sort of defy gravity a bit.
I did think, though, he made a couple of mistakes personally. If I were running the kind of attack team in one of the other party headquarters, I thought things like growth in every postcode.
That's such a hostage to fortune.
Right, cut to a year's time. Growth in what? And partly because leaflets are done by postcode, you could literally look at crime stats. You could look at
that's grown.
Right, exactly. I don't know, childhood obesity or what has antisocial behaviour. You could just send out a list in your postcode. Andy Burnham said growth would happen in your postcode. He's right. Here are all the terrible things that have that was quite interesting and quite easily done.
It also reminded me on that of do you remember the levelling up agenda? Of course you do. And it's suddenly everyone's going to be levelled up. Is everyone going to be connected to what? How does that work? So growth, again, to govern is to choose.
In general, some of his word salads, the place-based cooperation, finger pointing, point scoring, I think that's fine. But whilst he's riding on this wave of vibes, that all feels quite good. But if things do go wrong and the wheels do come off for him, it's just so easy to play this stuff back. You know, here we are at Prime Minister's questions. Well, Prime Minister, I hope you don't mind me point scoring or finger pointing, but you have failed on the following things. He has sort of, as you say, he's made himself a hostage to fortune with some of this stuff.
It's quite risky, isn't it? Because you can see there's a bit of high on your own supply-ness to some of this very extravagant rhetoric. He's going to be different totally, and you're absolutely right. So I've quite enjoyed in some of the reporting of Andy's speech, people being very grumpy about what Andy Burnham didn't say. Like he should have stood up and told us absolutely everything he has in his mind about being Prime Minister. However, there were some quite big gaps, weren't there, Cleo?
There were a few gaps. For example, he didn't say the word immigration once, which was interesting. Although this was billed, you know, to be totally fair to him, as a broad brush economic vision for the future, which I think he delivered on in that sense, because apart from the firm commitment of devolution, quite vague. One of the things that seems to have hacked people off is that they wanted him to essentially unveil his cabinet, exactly who he'd have. The top thing on people's minds seems to be Chancellor. There's great fear amongst the financial markets that it might be Ed Miliband. And in 2015, you know, he was hailed as Red Ed. People were, it's hard to remember this now because we've had Corbyn since, but people were very worried about Ed Miliband coming in.
And David Cameron said that we were going to have chaos with Ed Miliband.
Chaos with Ed Miliband. And I mean, he did do a couple of weird things. It's incredibly dated now, the idea that Russell Brand was his kind of big shout to the kids. Do you remember he had this like kitchen supper with Russell Brand?
In one of his many kitchens.
Since cancelled. In one of his many kitchens where, you know, Russell said, I am the Messiah and you must vote Ed. I don't think
and
that
the Millie
quite
fans.
panned out.
Do you remember the Millie fans?
Millie fans, like there was a big youthful push.
There was a cult of personality.
There was a cult of personality.
Extraordinary though it is to say it.
But similarly, you know, the markets were very nervous then, and certainly the Conservatives were able to paint him as, exactly as you say, chaos with Ed Miliband, Red Ed. What do you think, Mystic Mac?
So it's interesting that I think they have very, very firmly kind of rolled the pitch for Rachel Reeves going. And that's happened in the last few days. And she has sort of indicated that that's kind of what she's expecting too. And so I think there have been some thoughts a couple of weeks ago that maybe she would stay, and that doesn't look likely anymore. So I would bet on Shabana Mahmood.
Oh no, now we've said her lovely name. Okay, well, that opens up a lovely little hole at the Home Office. What happens there?
John Healey.
Previously Defence Secretary, very interesting resignation recently that essentially got the ball rolling for Keir Starmer going. And a man everyone likes.
I don't know. I mean, the problem, if you did have Shabana Mahmood as Chancellor, then you have left a problem in the Home Office, which is a hell of a department.
Yes.
And you would need somebody really tough to do that. I mean, personally, I think Shabana Mahmood is doing such an amazing job as Home Secretary that I wouldn't, you know, necessarily think it's a good idea to move her. But if you do need a new Chancellor, I would have thought somebody who is that clever, well-regarded and tough enough.
Yes.
It's not going to be easy because even with a very strong Prime Minister who's got a very clear idea, who's given everybody very clear instructions, let's imagine for a second that that's the situation we'll be dealing with. The actual job of Chancellor has to project massive amounts of confidence, and you do have to make some really difficult decisions, and you're going to have to carry some of the things that Andy Burnham's already signalled he's going to do. Like, there is going to be a reduction in the amount of money spent on welfare. That's tough. And you might want Pat McFadden, for example, again, widely respected, tough, old Labour, New Labour guy, to stay where he is in welfare, because in terms of transformation, that's a department that needs a really big...
Pat and Shabana together.
Dream team. I mean,
Although will she be making that many spending decisions? Because if it's all being devolved,
it's all given it's like everybody else's problem. Good luck to you, lads.
You'll be like Oprah, like, you get a car, you get a car. Yes.
I do. I mean, you're right. I think both ground my teeth and flared my nostrils at the kind of ridiculousness of people being disappointed that Andy Burnham didn't set out his cabinet yesterday.
Okay, so on the one hand, we've got the calls for Ed Miliband to be made Chancellor, but I am hearing little rumours that David Miliband might be making a return.
Do you know, I sat next to Dave Miliband last Thursday at an event at the IFG. So I say sat next to him. We were on the same panel. It wasn't just that we happened to be sat next to each other in the audience. And Alex Thomas at the IFG very elegantly put him on the spot and said, you know, would you consider serving under an Andy Burnham administration? And I was genuinely quite surprised by David's reaction, because I sort of thought he would just go, oh, you know, no, I've got a job, I live in New York, I'm doing the Red Cross thing. And he did a version of, well, if the ball comes loose from the back of the scrum. And I was like, oh, this is exciting.
So that would be, you know, bearing in mind Andy Burnham is not keen on the House of Lords by all accounts, this would presumably mean David Miliband becoming Lord Miliband of the North, somewhere. And apparently coming in as Foreign Secretary. One of the things I think is quite interesting about that, by the way, it's
Lord Cameron was
Lord Cameron did that in the days of Rishi Sunak's administration. But there was a deliberate move there, which was Rishi Sunak saying, not only do I want you to come in as Foreign Secretary, I want you to essentially crack on and do all that because I'm very focused on the domestic agenda. By the sounds of Burnham's first speech, that's what he wants to do also. There are rumours that he would keep Jonathan Powell on as National Security Advisor. What do you think of the Miliband speculation coming in through the Lords, coming in as Foreign Secretary? And do you think that is just a move from Burnham thinking, he's an old mucker of mine and I just want to kind of give him this brief and I can crack on?
I think it's really heartening to see that actually it looks like Andy Burnham is drawing on the actual storied and star ranks that the Labour Party has at its disposal. One of the things I found really weird about the Starmer government was they had a really, really good A-team of set of people and they just didn't really use them. So kind of big tick for like, why don't you use your talent, oh Labour Party? That seems like a very good idea. Personally very excited about siblings in the cabinet. That's fun. We had that with the Johnson brothers for a period of time. Do you remember? That was entertaining. We've had in the Labour Party the Eagle sisters.
The Reeves girls?
Reeves girls probably do sit around the cabinet table together, don't they? So, you know, a little bit of sibling rivalry in a cabinet setting, quite fun.
I don't know though. I feel like MPs do not like people being made peers and coming in to have a plum cabinet.
They don't like that, no, because they think it's their... Yeah, but do you know what? I'm like relentlessly don't care about that because I think what you should have is the best people in the job, whoever they are.
I'm excited for the dictatorship coming under Helen McNamara.
The government of all the talents.
I was interested, as a little side note, when Burnham mentioned, you know, how he thinks Westminster is a very unhappy place now and that he doesn't like whipping MPs on votes and he'd rather like to do away with that. And I did think to myself, Andy, come on, that's easily said now. No one likes to do it, but you're just going to have to. You know, he's got a parliamentary party where it feels like he has this massive majority. We've talked about this so many times, but actually a lot of people sitting on the Labour benches have paper thin majorities. And someone's got a 15 vote majority where Streeting has 600. It's tiny. So as things get tougher and, you know, with all the changes he wants to make, with the best will in the world, things are going to slip. You need whipping. You know, Keir Starmer has had to use a very effective whipping operation at various points with his own MPs to save embarrassing votes. And frankly, he's lost a few of those.
I mean, this comes out of what Andy Burnham said yesterday about not wanting a really aggressive whipping operation, comes out of some mistakes that were made in the early Starmer government about... Instead of doing the thing that parties with large majorities and the Labour Party historically done, which is like allow people to rebel a little bit. Like with the size of majority they had, I think Number 10 made a quite big mistake quite early on with being incredibly aggressive of everybody has to vote with the government and there's no opportunity to rebel. Whereas there's a long and storied history of Labour MPs occasionally voting against their own side. And by not allowing that little rebellion in the beginning, they created much bigger problems themselves by having huge numbers of MPs vote against them. So I think there's a sort of let's all be friends, stand in our prayer circle, whatever it was, version of let's not whip as aggressively. But there is a bit of a balance here with this sort of majority, with MPs who will be fighting every single other party in their constituency. There may well be times when, either for political expedience sake or just because that's what they want to do, that you have to let a bit of latitude. I think actually that is smart.
But he did also say, I essentially want to do away whipping, but you do have to do what I want. But you just said, I've now not got a stick. I'm just going to beat you with a carrot.
He's very charming. He's lovely.
I just don't.
Who can disagree with Andy?
That's one of the things I don't think he did need to say. That could have been saved for a WhatsApp group or something. I think one of the questions I think he may well have been asked is, do you think that you are the first female Labour leader / Prime Minister in all but sex? And the reason I asked that is because towards the end of last week, there was a bit of a furore because Tim Shipman in The Spectator published a quote from a Labour insider, a very senior Labour insider, but we don't know who.
We'd like to know who,
I think was trying to be helpful, but managed to just botch it horribly. Do you want to read it out, in fact?
One senior figure in the party even describes Burnham as Labour's first woman Prime Minister. The reason Labour have always craved, but also been cautious about, a female leader is because in a Labour government, she could have an unashamedly female agenda.
What might be on that agenda, Helen?
Focused on health, education, family finances, and issues like safer streets, social care, online safety for kids that are disproportionately important to women. Unlike the Tory female leaders, who are under internal pressure and the weight of history to show how tough they are on traditional male issues, along comes Andy, surrounded by female advisors and backers, but more importantly, genuinely passionate about all those traditionally female-orientated issues. And much less so with bombs and budgets. So could we finally see what Labour has failed to deliver all these years? A female PM in all but sex?
This is a classic example of sort of being too popular because everyone's trying to help you, even the complete idiots. And that is a perfect example of that. It's so unhelpful. I can see how there's this attempt to kind of, on the one hand, demystify, or there's an attempt to separate him from the toxic boys club that Keir Starmer was accused of being in charge by having all these female advisors around him. The idea that women are not interested in bombs and budgets, or the idea that men are not interested in education or safer streets, I find so insulting. I just find it amazing. And the idea that Theresa May was trying to outlad the lads.
Poor oppressed Theresa May and Margaret Thatcher, just doing what the men wanted, it turned out.
Yeah, because Theresa May just wanted to, her whole agenda, she just wanted to do it about
Just wanted to talk about lady things.
Yes,
but, yes. Not allowed to, because of the patriarchy.
Lady things.
It's still making my blood boil. And I think the broader point here is that there is a real issue that, yet again, here we are with nobody standing in this Labour leadership contest who's not a man. Labour have a proper problem here, and they like to think they don't.
Yeah.
And the fact that is a senior Labour person who not only thinks like that about women, but thought it was useful to talk like that, just gives you a sense of why they are where they are. Mm. And it is extremely dangerous and problematic and wrong. And it's not a question of saying it's okay, actually, because I've got loads of great women on my team and aren't these women great and, I'm scared of her indoors, which is sometimes what you get. Actually really matters that there are actual real-life women who are involved in powerful jobs, making decisions and having an input, not just because of female issues. Thanks for listening to today's episode. Remember to follow the show on your podcast player of choice and leave us a 5-star review if you enjoyed it.
And please do email us your feedback and questions. We're at intheroom@independent.co.uk. Also, if you're listening on Spotify, you can leave us little comments under today's episode. And if you follow us on Instagram, I encourage you to do so. You can see all the best bits of the pod there. We're at intheroom.pod.
This podcast is part of the Independent Podcast Network and produced in association with Next Chapter Studios.
The executive producer is Rod Adahali and the producer is Sam Durham.
And a special mention to our content editor, Maya Anushka, our video editor, Vali Raza, and our videographer, Dan Faber. Thank you all.
Thanks for listening. See you next week.